tell a story of our past, but it's a struggle when the label is absent to find the connection to the maker and the why and how behind the fabrics. One of my Quilt Crew members told me of the Quebec Quilt Registry, where not only are quilts documented, it has become a useful resource for research on the culturally diverse history of Canadian quilts. And today we have Carla Rivard, the coordinator of the registry, to tell us all about it. So grab your sewing and a cup of tea, and here's my interview with Carla Rivard. Welcome to the show, Carla. Whereabouts in the world are you coming to us from?
I am coming to you from a lovely small town in Quebec called St. Lambert. It's on the south shore of Montreal. I am facing a golf course. We had snow this morning, so it's a pretty sight.
Are you originally from that area?
I grew up in Montreal. I'm originally from Germany. We came to Canada when I was 9. My husband and I moved to his hometown of St. Lambert about some 30 odd years ago. So this is home.
Yeah, my daughter is on the South Shore. She's in Brossard.
Oh, not very far from me at all.
Not too far. The Quilt Registry was brought to my attention by one of my crew members, France Carpentier.
Yes, she's actually a member of my guild.
Okay.
And I was wondering where you had discovered the registry.
We were talking about labels and legacy, and she popped in and told us about this registry. Can you tell us more about it?
Started in, I think, 1992, essentially by 2 women who were interested in seeing a difference between Anglophone and Francophone to see, because in Quebec it was more common in the olden days to do weaving rather than quilting. So they wanted to see if there was a cultural difference in what people were producing. I think there were about 3 or 4 women originally. The real originator is Adair Schlatter, who is still with us. She now lives in Victoria, BC. She'll be very happy to see that we're getting international recognition here for our program that she worked so hard to get started.
You said that it started from 4 women that were wanting to compare the different styles between. Mm-hmm. What did they find?
To be honest with you, I think they found that there was not much difference. Quilting, really, it's quite common throughout, as you know, throughout the world practically, just different types of techniques. No, I haven't seen anything that really summarized anything. It started out with a small registry here in St. Lambert, of course, since they were all members originally of the South Shore Quilters Guild. It was a snowy day in December, and 12 people came and registered their quilts, and that was the start of it.
And in those days, it would have been probably all manual. There would be no internet to download photos to or anything like that.
Yes, it was manual, and they started off when they were traveling with a wooden stand to hold the quilts on top of the car. So times have changed, but the original photos were print photos, so we transferred to slides, and then the slides were numerized. When we eventually got together with the Gail and Stephen Jaroslawski Institute of Studies in Canadian Art at Concordia University, we put the pictures in electronic format.
So originally it was not attached to any academia. It wasn't a research project or anything. It was just purely interest on these people's behalf.
Exactly. Isn't that how most things start? We were just very lucky, how it goes. Somebody knows somebody knows somebody, and we were able to get together with the Institute, and they built the database. And originally, students would do the data entry, but now I do the data entry, which is time-consuming. But as I say, it's a labor of love.
What is the oldest quilt that you have in your collection?
The oldest one is dated 1761. I'll show it to you later. It was made in Maryland, I believe, in the US. And we have several that date from about that period. We can search for it through periods of time. Say we put in 1760 to 1800, and we'll come up with quite a few.
Most collections don't go back that far. They're usually to the mid 1800s in North America. Those are some pretty old quilts.
Yes, actually, McCord Museum in Montreal does have some old quilts. We did register them. No, I wasn't involved with it at the time, but they did go and hold a registry session at McCord. The quilts are stored flat museum type. I'd like to go again, actually. I'm sure they've had some new acquisitions. So if anybody from McCord is watching, just get in touch with me, and I'd love to bring a team over to register some more quilts.
So in the beginning, it sounds like the registry was very much, we're going to get in our car and we're going to take the photos, as opposed to people bringing the quilts to them and filling in forms.
Well, that's actually how it works. I'm talking for my team, for the team of the Quilt Registry team. We receive a request from either a guild, or in Quebec, there is an organization called Les Cercles de Fermières. They're very active in the more rural regions. They promote handicrafts. They will get in touch with us and request that we come and hold a registry session. They host it. Our only request is that they have at least 25 quilts to register, just to help to defray the travel costs, because we will go just about anywhere in Quebec.
So is there a fee attached to registering?
Yes, it's at the moment it's $8 per quilt.
So just explain to me, how does the registry work?
All right. As I said, we will get a request from a guild, a Cercle de Fermières, Women's Institute, sometimes church groups will get together. They will ask that we come and hold a registry session. We go out and set up at the local hall or wherever it's being held. It has to be a large enough space so to accommodate, those big conference tables, that folding tables, the big ones. Well, we need to set up 4 of those to be able to lay the quilts flat for examination. So we usually have 2 exam tables. All depends on how many quilts we have to register. If it's more, we'll have 3 tables set up. So it needs a big space. Also needs space to be able to hang the quilts, to photograph them, and have sufficient distance to be able to get the full quilt into the frame. We have one person who does the interview with the people who are registering their quilt. They will have filled out a form beforehand, giving details about the present owner of the quilt, who made the quilt, and personal information about the quilter, where they were born, the date of birth. Those things don't appear on the public side of the registry. Then we get into details. Who made the quilt, who quilted it, because very often it's not the same person. Nowadays, it used to be the same person would make the quilt and quilt it, but now there's, as you know, there's a lot of professional long-arm quilters who will do the quilting. Once the interview is done, the interviewer assigns a number to each quilt. Is assigned a number, a sequential number, and then it goes into a waiting area to wait for the first examination table to be ready. It's the examiners are a team of 2. They will look at the quilt very carefully, measure it for the size of the quilt. What is the technique? Is it patchwork, applique, embroidery, crazy quilt, modern quilt, whatever? Just the technique. Look, what is the primary color? The color that stands out the most on the quilt. Then they will get into, is it hand or machine made? What is the block set, straight, on point, etc. Manually count the blocks. They would love to count the blocks behind you. uh, to see what is the state of the quilt. Is it used? Is it stained? Is it damaged? Has it been repaired? Is there sashing? Then they'll have to measure the sashing. So it's quite a rigorous exam. It is not an evaluation. We don't evaluate the quilt. It's simply recording history.
Do they usually have a label on them?
Unfortunately not. We give a little pep talk while we're doing it. We do encourage people to label their quilts. And we also teach people about folding their quilts. If they're storing their quilts, they should be refolding them every few months at least in order to get the creases out so that the creases are not permanent. That's something that I notice particularly as I'm one who does the photography. And if the quilt's been folded up in a closet because it's so precious that it can't be used, then it doesn't hang properly. And it just doesn't give a good picture. Especially, I noticed that especially in white whole cloth quilts, they're very difficult to photograph.
Yeah. You can't see that beauty unless you're like this far from them.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So what proportion of the quilts that are registered now are like they're being offered by the maker?
That's what I really find the most interesting and is when people bring us old quilts that their grandmother, great-grandmother made. And quite often they're damaged. We've had some that are practically falling apart, but they're still a precious item in that person. Family belongings, and it's part of the history, and that's really why the program exists, because we're trying to record history. We're trying to preserve the history because you've made the quilt. You've put in hours and hours of work and spent these days quite a lot of money on fabrics. You've taken the time to make it. It's going to live after you. The registry, the next owner of the quilt can go onto the website and see, oh, I see who made this quilt. All they have to do is look for the number and they'll find all of the pertinent information. So that's why we do it.
Now, I notice on your website that you're under the umbrella of Courtepointe Quebec, which is basically translates as Quilters of Quebec.
It used to be called Courtepointe Quebec Quilts.
Okay.
But it was changed about probably 10 years ago to Courtepointe Quebec. I'll tell you a little bit about the organization because it is quite interesting. Was founded in 1988 following a Quilt Canada meeting that was held in Montreal in 1987. Again, Adair Schletter, who was very, very active in the quilting world, a couple of other ladies. There were 5 founders of Courtepointe Quebec, getting other quilts together and organizing a group. And it grew and grew. And we now have 43 guilds that are registered with Courtepointe Quebec. And there are 642 members. 642 members, including 6 males, 11 members in Ontario, 2 in BC, 1 in Nova Scotia, and 1 in France. And anybody can join. You don't have to be in Quebec. You don't have to be a member of a guild. You just go on to the Courtepointe Quebec website and fill out the form and become a member of Courtepointe Quebec. It has benefits, not just the fact of the camaraderie of being part of a group. We have a monthly electronic newsletter, Zoom meetings, some of which are free workshops, wonderful workshops. We've also had presentations from someone in France talking about their quilting experience. We also have a biannual exhibit of quilts from all over Quebec. We just had one last year. And the next one will be in 2026. Being a member gives you a discount on the admission fee, and it also gives you a discount if you want to exhibit your quilts.
How is the structure pertaining to the registry? Are they in charge of finding volunteers and?
No, I'm the coordinator of the registry. It very loosely reports to Courtepointe Quebec at the moment. Of course, all that can change. I'm not going to be doing this forever. I've been doing it for about over 12 years now. So
wow.
it is quite a lot of work. They are, let's say, our sponsors.
So you're a volunteer?
We are all volunteers, yes. I have a team of about 10 to 12 people. It all depends on where we're going. I try to limit the distance that people have to drive just to keep the costs down. And if we're going to somewhere where it's a 6-hour drive, try to find people who are closest to the destination.
And how does it relate to Concordia? Are they holding the database? I know you mentioned that special art fund a couple of times.
Concordia is holding our archive. Because we are volunteers, we prefer not to keep it in our own homes, and they host the website.
So are you ever given quilts? Like, do you hold inventory of quilts?
No, we don't. No. I often get calls from people who ask, what can I have these quilts? What can I do with them? And I say, unfortunately, I really can't help you. If they're old quilts, I suggest that they go to their local museum.
So you've been doing this for 12 years. You must have seen some pretty magnificent quilts in that time.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I have volunteers who hang the quilts for me on the stands. And I see the quilt as I'm photographing it. But it's only when I'm working with the quilt afterwards, because I position it in Photoshop. I work with it in Photoshop. And it's then that I really see the quilt and I say, wow, was one quilt that we registered, I think it was in Quebec City a number of years ago, that was made by someone who had worked in a factory that made corsets. So going back quite a while, has been a while since we wore corsets. And she made a quilt with scraps from the fabric that corsets were made from. It was quite interesting. It was very bright because of that pink luminosity. And that was really one of the ones that stands out in my mind.
That has a really good story behind it, too.
Yes, I hope that I'm going to try to find it. She did write about how she got the fabrics, and she even included the pattern, which had come from an old newspaper. They used to publish patterns in newspapers, especially in the States.
So is your registry keeping any kind of log on these sources of patterns at all?
That is one of the things that we look at when we do the examination. We will look at what is the block and what is the reference. If we have to look up the block, we use Barbara Blackman and we'll put in the reference number.
I had the pleasure of interviewing Barbara Blackman a couple of years ago, and thank God she put in all that work. I find her book a wonderful reference.
I know. We carry the book around, and we also have the one on the applique blocks as well.
So the registry's been around since late 1991, and you've been with them for 12 years. How often are you going back into the beginning archive of that registry?
Not too often. Essentially keep it for people who have registered their quilts. Personally, I'm not going back into it, but it is open to researchers. We have had some researchers go and examine our archives.
Are you personally a quilter?
Yes, I do quilt. I don't have a lot of time to do it, but I do quilt. I especially love hand quilting. I do a lot of English paper piecing.
And when did you start quilting?
I started quilting when I took early retirement. You know, I'd always been interested in sewing. I started sewing. I think I was about 8 or 9. My mother had hired a dressmaker to make coats for my sister and myself, and I think I was being a little too intrusive. So she handed me a piece of cloth and a needle and sat me down, and that started me on the path of sewing. I used to make my own clothes, and I knit, embroidered, any handicrafts.
You've built this amazing database. How often are academics and researchers wanting to take a look into your archive?
At the moment, we haven't had too many requests, but it's there for the future.
I interviewed Joanne. She was looking into the history of World War II quilts that were made in Canada.
Yes, I know exactly who you're talking about because I have spoken with her as well. She was very interested in establishing a Canada-wide registry, but unfortunately that has been put on the back burner for a while, but she's still very interested.
How can somebody get their quilt into your registry?
What they have to do is to find a guild, a secte fermière, or it can be a little quilting group as long as they have 25 quilts and a space large enough to host a registry. You know, get in touch with me by email or phone, and we'll be happy to set it up. And we will go, you know, wherever we can. We've got a couple of registries coming up in the future. We have one in the West Island coming up in June, one in Quebec City in May. That's going to be a fairly long trip. One in Mont-Saint-Grégoire, which is in the Montérégie. Oh, we're going to Gatineau.
Are you going to Quilt Canada?
As individuals.
Okay.
Not as the registry, but we were at Salon 2024 to promote the registry, and we had a lot of people stopping by to ask about what it's all about and how can they register their quilts.
So is it just for people in Quebec or is it anywhere?
The quilt can originate anywhere, but it has to reside in Quebec. If someone has registered their quilt and it is sent out of province, of course, it'll stay in the registry.
The registry is in Quebec, which means the first language is French.
Yes, but we registered the quilt in the language that the person registering the quilt wants. Sometimes our entries are a little mixed in language, you know, Frenglish. I think Quebecers understand. When I got involved, I was an eager beaver, and I said, oh, I'm going to go back to quilt number 1 and make corrections because the students who were doing the entries didn't necessarily know anything about quilting. So they wrote down what they saw. And unfortunately, some people's handwriting is, some people write better than others.
Yes, and I think if you're not familiar with textiles, you don't know the language. Like you just say, oh, blue fabric, as opposed to blue cotton.
Mm-hmm. Our examiners are all quilters, and they know their fabrics. And sometimes we'll have quilts where we have to really say, you know, what is this? When was this type of fabric made? So we'll go back in our little history and say, oh yes, polyester started becoming common in whatever. And
have you found any of these quilts stuffed with something interesting?
Blankets, of course. We had one with mattress ticking, flannel sheets, just about anything. Of the older ones, you know, we can't even figure out what it could possibly be.
I'm talked with a woman she's out northern Alberta, and she said her mother and grandmother stuffed their quilts with sock tops. Like they would cut off the bottom where they'd worn through and then slice the leg in half and lie them flat.
Oh, haven't come across that. We'll keep a lookout for that. One of the interesting things that we found from time to time are flour sacks for the backing.
Have you noticed any trends or changes in the database just since you've been looking after it?
The quilts that are being made now, they tend to be from popular patterns. You know, we see a lot of the same patterns coming up now. Especially if it's a guild where they've had someone in to give a workshop. And it's very interesting to see the same pattern in different fabrics. What a difference a fabric can make in the appearance of a quilt.
And these examiners, like, is there a test they have to take? Is there a course that they have to take? Or you just train them yourself within?
Usually it's sort of... one person will train the other. Someone has done it a long time, and if we have someone new coming, they'll come and work with a team for a couple of sessions. We did have a training session 2 years ago that was given to us by a quilt evaluator. We revised our form somewhat after that. She gave us a few little hints, but basically we were doing it the right way. If anybody is watching and they know about any registries anywhere else in Canada, I'd love to know about it.
So if a person is putting on a label now with the idea of the registry behind it, what information is really important to put on that label?
Of course, the name of the maker, where it was made, the date, who it was made for. Was it made for a special occasion? Did they use any special fabrics? For example, did you use scraps from dressmaking quilts? Or the fabrics given to you by someone? Did you buy them while you were traveling? Anything that makes a story.
How many quilts are in the registry?
6,284 and counting.
How long does it take between your documentation sessions and them actually making it onto the database? Is there a big backlog?
At the moment there is, but only because we're changing the software.
I notice all the photos have a black background. Do you alter the photos so that happens?
Yes, I cropped the photos. They're photographed against a black curtain, but depending on the light condition, it doesn't always show up as black. But I don't touch up the photos. The photos are the color that they are. That's why we have the color register at the top. So, and any researcher coming in knows what the values of those colors are, even if they're not right. So they'll be able to tell exactly.
How many photos do you take of each quilt?
I probably take about 3 or 4. If it's a really interesting quilt, I will take a close-up. And if the back is interesting, I'll take a photo of the back as well. Sometimes I'll take a photo of the label, but I don't want to load the database up with too many photos.
Yeah, they do take up a lot of space.
Yes, I have to reduce them to web size. So that's another step in the process. The person who registers the quilt or the owner of the quilt gets a copy of the registry form as well as a print of the photo.
A lot of work for every single entry.
Yes.
Can you show us how the registry works?
I'll go into search the database.
Okay.
And scroll down to the bottom of there and go to registry number.
Okay.
And if you put in 266.
And now I've got a beautiful red and white quilt.
That is one of the ways that you can do your search.
So all photos of the quilts will have that number attached to them?
They will have the number that they've been assigned, the number from 1 to 6,284.
Right.
So if someone has a quilt with a label on the back, it will have a number, and they just type in the number and their quilt will pop up. And if you scroll down a little bit below the photo, if you click on that blue number, it will give you more details about the quilt.
This was a gift from grandmother and brought to Quebec in 1870. That could hang at a quilt show today.
Yes, some of them are amazing.
Now, I also notice on this picture that is this a scale up in the top
Yes.
right-hand corner?
Yeah. So that's just to help, again, researchers to see the size of the quilt and the full dimension of the quilt. In this case, unfortunately, we didn't have a lot of information about the maker.
Right.
We do know where they lived.
Look at all the details that you've gathered on it.
Mm-hmm.
Size, the color, block set, fabric, backing condition, number of fabrics. Wow, this is a lot of work.
Now we have the color register, and we've changed, we're able to put the number on top. As you see, there's the black background. When it's a black quilt, I change the background to white.
Right.
Do you have any quilts of Colette Dumont in the registry? I know she's won Quilt Canada several times.
We had a registry session at a retreat of Courtepointe Quebec. That's one of the other things that being a member of Courtepointe Quebec gives you. You can attend a retreat. And last year we held a registry session during the retreat, and Colette brought in quite a number of her quilts. And my goodness, they're magnificent.
Are they not? They're just so breathtaking. And when you read her background, that she has self-taught herself pretty well, all those skills. It's incredible.
You can search by name in the database.
Okay, search the database. Oh, this is a good way to do it. See some of her recent works here. I remember when this won Quilt Canada. Amazing amount of work that you do there. Thank you very much. I'm sure there's lots of people who are going to appreciate being able to look up family quilts on that registry for years to come.
That's why we do the work.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your knowledge and how the registry works. If people want to get a hold of you, how do they get a hold of you?
They can contact me via the website, or just Carla, CARLA .Rivard, RIVARD, @gmail.com.
Thank you again for your time.
It was my pleasure, Karen.
And I hope maybe we'll bump into each other at Quilt Canada. I hope you've enjoyed my interview with Carla Rivard and learning about the Quebec Quilt Registry. It will be such a wonderful archive for the future. If you or your quilt guild would like to get in contact with Carla and the Quilt Registry, I'll leave the contact information down in the video notes. Next time you're in your sewing room, be sure to have Karen's Quilt Circle playing in the background. I have interviewed so many amazing, interesting people on this show. Let one inspire you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.